Say the word Swift to 100 truck drivers and watch what happens. Half of them laugh. The other half wince. Type the name into any trucking forum and within a page you'll find drivers turning the company's own logo into a joke they tell on themselves. Sure wish I finished training. Stop whining, I'm trying. Nobody had to teach drivers those jokes. They wrote them and they keep writing new ones because the company keeps giving them material. Swift isn't famous the way most companies dream of being famous. It's barely known outside the industry and infamous inside it. It is, by most measures, the largest truckload carrier this country has ever produced. And for 2 generations, it has also functioned as the industry's front door, running one of the largest training pipelines for every new driver who's ever held a Class A license. This is the story of what it costs an industry when the company training the most people is also the company everyone wants to leave. And to be clear up front, Swift didn't do this alone. No single company destroys an entire profession by itself. But more than anyone else in American trucking, Swift scaled the model that did. Number 1. The truck with 1 tank of gas. Phoenix, Arizona, 1966. A family named Moyes, Carl, his wife Betty, sons Jerry and Ronald, moves down from Utah with 1 leased truck and starts a small hauling outfit called Common Market. Jerry, fresh out of college, takes the wheel. In 1969, the family buys the trucking assets of a meatpacking company's old delivery fleet and keeps its name, Swift. Write that down. The name was acquired, not earned, and it will carry a great deal more weight than the company that first carried it. Swift built itself as a non-union operation from the start, expanding through Arizona and the Southwest during exactly the years the International Brotherhood of Teamsters was losing its grip on American trucking nationally. The company has stated publicly that it has never operated as a union shop, and it has held that line for over 50 years. Remember that. Every wage fight in this story plays out inside a workplace that was built from its earliest years without a seat at the table for the people doing the driving. This isn't a Swift invention, and it's worth saying plainly. The conditions that made it possible trace back to 1980, when federal deregulation tore down the old rate and route controls that had protected trucking wages for decades. Swift didn't start that shift. They industrialized it, took a deregulated, non-union, price-competitive industry and built the largest version of it the country has ever seen. By 1985, Carl Moyes is dead and Jerry has bought out his brother and a partner named Randy Knight. Yes, the same Knight whose company Swift will eventually merge with. Swift goes public in 1990. Through the 90s, it swallows carrier after carrier. Cooper Motor Lines, MS Carriers, a string of failing operators absorbed whole. By the early 2000s, it is the largest publicly traded trucking company in America, hauling for Walmart, Amazon, Procter & Gamble. The trade press calls it relentless growth and shrewd deal-making. The men in the cabs call it something else. Number 2. The buyout that loaded the gun. In October 2005, Jerry Moyes is forced out as CEO after an SEC insider trading investigation. He settles for $1.26 million without admitting wrongdoing. It looks for a moment like an ending. It is the opposite. A year later, Moyes returns, not as an employee, as a buyer. He takes the company private for roughly $2.4 billion, financed with over $2.9 billion in new debt loaded directly onto Swift's books. The deal closes in May 2007. 6 months later, the Great Recession arrives. Freight volume collapses, headcount drops by a fifth. Swift is now carrying the heaviest debt load in its history at the exact moment its revenue falls off a cliff. This is a mechanism we see again and again across the trucking and logistics industries. When a company is loaded with leveraged buyout debt and freight rates are under pressure, there's only one lever big enough to pull. What you pay the person in the seat. Swift didn't invent that lever. It just had, by sheer scale, the most of it to pull in the entire country. Number 3. The front door that's also a trapdoor. Here's where destroyed American truck drivers stops being a slogan and starts being a mechanism, and it begins with a number nobody outside the industry thinks about. A CDL costs real money, and most people who want one don't have it sitting in a bank account. In 1987, Swift opens its own driving academy to exploit that gap. The pitch sounds generous. Come train with us, no money down, we'll cover the tuition, you pay it back out of your paycheck once you're driving. For someone with no savings staring down a $6,000 CDL school bill, that pitch is the whole reason they walk in the door. It is also underneath a leash. Here's how the leash works. Tuition is charged over roughly a year, then clawed back out of weekly pay over the following 2. Room costs at the training facility are billed separately week by week. Meals aren't included. Bring your own money. The debt is only forgiven after 12 full months on the job. Leave before then, for almost any reason, and the entire balance comes due in cash, all at once. One driver, mid-contract and starting to panic, described it online. On the hook for $8,000, feeling like the company had him exactly where it wanted him. Swift's defense is technically true and reveals everything anyway. There's no employment contract, just a bill. Stay, and it disappears in installments. Leave, and you owe it all at once, immediately. That isn't tuition reimbursement. That's a debt that only stops being a debt as long as you keep showing up. And what that debt actually buys has been tested formally in federal court. In 2011, Ham versus Swift Transportation was certified as a class action. Former students at Swift's Tennessee Academy alleging the school's in-house CDL testing didn't meet the state's own standards. Swift fought the certification and lost. The case dragged on for years and ended in a multi-million-dollar settlement. Read the forums from that period, and the anger isn't really about money. It's about people who paid with debt, with a year of their freedom, to be trained properly, and were told later the license they walked away with might not have been earned the way they were promised. This is the engine. Recruit people with no money and no experience. Finance their entry into the industry. Attach a debt that functions as a leash for precisely as long as the company needs it to hold, and not one day longer. Then, 12 months later, let them go. Trained, certified, and now competing for jobs against the next class coming up behind them at wages that Pipeline helped keep flat for everyone, including the drivers who never went near a Swift Academy. For an enormous number of American truckers, Swift is the entry point into the profession. It's also, just as often, the place where they burn out of it. Number 4. The number the industry doesn't want. Said out loud. According to the American Trucking Association's annualized driver turnover at large truckload carriers, the kind of company Swift is, has spent most of the last 2 decades sitting somewhere between 80 and 100% a year. At its worst, in late 2005, it touched 136%. Say that back slowly. For every 100 seats on the payroll, well over 100 different human beings sat in them across a single year. That is not a labor market. That is a wood chipper with a paycheck attached. The industry's own trade body will tell you this figure mostly captures drivers hopping between large carriers chasing a sign-on bonus, not drivers fleeing the profession entirely. Proof of leverage, they'll say, not misery. Listen to that argument closely because it convicts the industry even when it's trying to defend it. If drivers are leaving a company in those numbers when the only other option on the table is another truckload carrier offering a few $1,000s more just to start, that doesn't mean the job is fine. It means the job, as Swift and its peers have built it, isn't good enough to keep anyone who has any other choice. And Swift, the largest fleet recruiting the largest number of brand new debt-financed, contractually tethered drivers every single year, isn't standing outside that churn. It is the machine generating it. Number 5. The joke the whole industry tells on this one company. Most companies would kill for the kind of name recognition Swift has inside the trucking world. They've gotten it, just inverted. Instead of a fan club, they've got a punchline, and the company never had to lift a finger to earn it. Spend 10 minutes on a trucker forum or trucking TikTok, and you'll find an entire folk culture built around mocking this one company's logo. Drivers don't just complain about Swift. They've turned the 5 letters of its own name into a running joke that rewrites itself every season. Sure wish I finished training. Slow wagon in fast traffic. Stop whining, I'm effing trying. Lists of these have circulated on driver forums for over a decade, refreshed by every new graduating class. One veteran driver explaining online why other truckers give Swift rigs a wide berth on the road put it as flatly as it can be put. Swift is the running joke of the entire trucking industry. That's what makes this joke culture so damning. A fan club is a gift the public gives a company it loves, usually built on never seeing what the job actually costs the person doing it. This is the opposite kind of gift, built by the people who lived it, aimed straight back at the company that trained them and then burned through them, requiring no marketing department and no permission. The punchline writes itself every single year, because every single year there's a fresh class of new graduates discovering exactly what the contract really meant. Number 6. The lawsuit that proves the drivers were never the point. One more piece, because it closes the loop on everything above. In 2019, a rival carrier, CRST, sued Swift, not on behalf of any driver, but because Swift had been recruiting people who were still locked into CRST's own training debt contracts. An Iowa jury ordered Swift to pay CRST $15 million. Sit with the actual shape of that case. The dispute was never, should a company be allowed to lock new drivers into multi-year debt contracts as a condition of training them? Both sides agreed that part was fine. CRST's entire case depended on those contracts being valid and enforceable. The only question on trial was whose leash a given driver was supposed to be wearing. The drivers themselves weren't plaintiffs. They weren't defendants. They were the asset $2 billion companies were arguing over in federal court, the same way you'd argue over a piece of equipment that had wandered onto the wrong lot. That, more than any single complaint about pay, is the cleanest evidence this entire story offers that the training debt model was never a regrettable side effect of how mega carriers compete. It is the terrain the competition is fought on, and the driver is the ground. Number 7. The floor Swift built and who's still standing on it. Zoom out for a second. Real wages for long-haul American truckers stayed largely flat for most of the 2000s and 2010s, even as the hours stayed brutal and the toll on a driver's body stayed exactly what it always was. Then in late 2021, with supply chains seizing up and shelves visibly emptying, the country discovered it was short more than 100,000 qualified drivers, and the government scrambled to launch emergency programs to get people into the seat younger and faster than ever. Almost nobody on the news that week asked the obvious follow-up. Why was a job that moves nearly everything Americans buy unable to hold on to the people trained to do it? Swift is not the entire answer. No single company ever is. But when the largest carrier in the country runs the largest training pipeline in the country on a debt model engineered to hold a driver only as long as he's useful and release him the moment that calculation flips, that isn't a private personnel policy. It's the floor the rest of the industry gets measured against. A driver shortage stops being a mystery the moment you realize the front door and the revolving door have been the same door for over 50 years. By design, not by accident. So next time you're behind one of those white and orange trailers on the interstate, you'll know exactly what's written on the side of it. Not just a logo, a pipeline. A stranger walks in one end with no money and no license, and 12 months later, a trained, certified driver walks out the other end, already being undercut by the next class coming up behind him. If you drove for Swift or trained at one of its academies, or you've watched this churn from the other side of a recruiter's desk, the comments are open and we read every one of them. And if this is the kind of story you want more of, you know what the subscribe button is for.